Arman had always believed that life tested the poor twice, first with hunger, and then with humiliation. At 22, he carried both like invisible weights on his shoulders. He slept in a tiny rented room near the university, where the paint peeled off the walls and the cold winter wind slipped through the cracks. Every morning he woke before sunrise, worked at a nearby bakery to earn a few coins, attended classes all day, and spent nights tutoring children to pay for his books. But despite his struggles, Arman had something most wealthy people lacked: a gentle heart and quiet dignity. One cold afternoon, as he hurried across the university courtyard, his professor stopped him. "Arman," he said cautiously, "there's someone who wants to speak with you. Please, be respectful, no matter how unusual it sounds." Arman frowned in confusion, but followed him. Inside the office sat Elena Ivanovna, a 71-year-old widow known across the city. A millionaire, a businesswoman, a legend. And yet, she looked incredibly fragile that day, her hands trembling slightly, her eyes carrying the loneliness of decades. Her expensive coat, her polished cane, her pearl necklace, none of it could hide the quiet emptiness in her face. Arman had only seen her in newspapers. Never in person, never this vulnerable. "Sit down, dear," she said gently. He obeyed, unsure why she would ever want to meet a poor student like him. For a moment, she simply studied him. Not with judgment, but with a softness that made Arman uncomfortable, as if she saw straight into his soul. "I know you wonder why you're here," she began. "I've watched you, Arman. Not your grades, not your achievements, but your kindness. You give away half your lunch to a homeless man. You help elderly people cross the street. You tutor students for free when they can't afford to pay." Arman's face warmed with embarrassment. Those small acts were nothing special to him, just what one human should do for another. Elena continued, her voice almost breaking. "People have left me, one by one. My husband, my son, my closest friends. Money remained, but the house became colder every year." Arman lowered his eyes. He suddenly felt her grief in the silence between them. "I will be honest with you," she said, her voice steadier now. "I am old, I am lonely, and I don't have much time left. I need companionship, not romance, just someone who will respect me, talk to me, share a meal with me, and walk with me in my final years." Arman nodded sympathetically until she said the words that froze him. "I want you to marry me." His heart stopped. Surely he misheard. A poor 22-year-old student, marrying a 71-year-old millionaire. Elena saw the shock on his face and raised a hand softly. "I don't want to buy your love, Arman. I only want a peaceful ending to my story. And I promise I will make your life easier in return. But the choice must come from your heart." Outside the window, snow began to fall, silent, gentle, covering the world in white. Inside the room, Arman felt the weight of a decision that would change his life forever. The mansion was the kind of place people whispered about, grand, old, and as silent as a museum. When Arman stepped through the tall carved doors for the first time, he felt as though he was entering a world that no longer remembered joy. The chandeliers sparkled, the marble floors shone, but the air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves carried memories too painful to speak of. Elena Ivanovna walked slowly beside him, leaning gently on her cane. Though she tried to smile, her eyes revealed decades of solitude. For a woman who owned everything, she seemed to possess nothing that truly mattered. "This house," she said softly, "was once full of laughter." Arman followed, her gaze to a long hallway lined with portraits. A younger Elena stood in many of them, bright, confident, surrounded by family. Her husband's arm wrapped around her, her son hugging her waist, celebrations frozen in golden frames. But those pictures only made the present feel colder. Elena paused at one particular portrait. Her son, about Arman's age, smiling with a medal in his hand. "He was my pride," she whispered. For the first time, Arman heard her voice tremble. "He died in an accident. And with him, a part of me died too." Arman lowered his head out of respect. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Silence, he realized, could be kinder than words. Elena led him to the dining room, where 2 places had been set at a large table meant for 12. A single maid stood by quietly, her face neutral but her eyes grateful, perhaps relieved that someone new had entered this lonely universe. They ate simple soup together, and though the meal was quiet, it didn't feel awkward. Instead, it felt like two souls cautiously reaching toward each other. After dinner, Elena asked, "Would you walk with me in the garden?" "It helps me sleep." Arman nodded. Outside, the garden was enormous but poorly tended. Flowers once cherished now wilted in neglect. A fountain stood dry, covered in leaves. Even wealth, Arman thought, could not protect a home from loneliness. They walked slowly along a stone path. Elena spoke with surprising warmth about her past. How she had built her businesses after losing her husband. How she had traveled the world. How she had believed strength meant never asking for help. But strength, she sighed, is useless when you have no one to share life with. Arman listened, every word settling deep in his heart. He had always thought rich people lived in perfect comfort. But Elena's loneliness was deeper than his poverty. At one point she stumbled slightly. Reflexively, Arman reached out and held her arm. She looked up at him, not with embarrassment, but with gratitude so sincere it made his chest tighten. "Thank you," she murmured. In that moment, Arman understood something profound. This marriage was not a transaction. It was two lonely worlds quietly meeting in the middle. Later, as they returned inside, Elena touched his hand gently. "It has been many years," she said, "since someone cared enough to simply walk with me." Arman smiled faintly, and in that small, fragile exchange, the first real bond between them was formed. The first week of their unusual marriage passed quietly, almost gently. Arman found a rhythm in the mansion, waking early, preparing breakfast with the cook, helping Elena down the stairs, reading to her in the afternoons, and sharing tea in the evenings. Though he had entered the marriage unsure, every day revealed something new about Elena, a sharp wit, a hidden tenderness, a mind still bright despite her age. Sometimes she joked that he reminded her of her younger self, stubborn, determined, always reaching for something better. But on the seventh morning, everything changed. Arman woke earlier than usual, sensing something wrong. The mansion, usually filled with the soft footsteps of servants and the clinking of dishes, was silent, unnaturally silent. The air felt heavy, as though something tragic hovered over the walls. He walked to Elena's room and knocked gently. No answer. "Madam Elena," he called softly. Still nothing. A flicker of panic rose in his chest. He pushed the door open slowly. The sight froze him. Elena lay half-slipped off the side of her bed, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Her cane had fallen to the floor. Her hands trembled as she tried to reach for the bell that summoned help. "Arman," she whispered weakly, her voice like a fading echo. He rushed to her side. "Elena, what happened? Can you hear me?" His voice cracked with fear. She nodded faintly, though her eyes were losing focus. He lifted her carefully, supporting her frail body with trembling hands, and shouted for the staff. Within minutes the mansion filled with hurried footsteps. The doctor, who lived nearby and visited regularly, arrived with emergency equipment. Arman stood by helplessly as they checked her pulse, her oxygen, her heartbeat. "What's happening to her?" he asked urgently. The doctor took a slow breath. "She's been sick for a long time, longer than she told you." Arman's stomach dropped. He looked at Elena, lying so small and fragile in her bed. As the doctor adjusted her IV, she opened her eyes again and searched for Arman. He moved close and held her hand gently. "Elena, I'm here," he whispered. In her fragile state, she managed a faint smile. "You always are," she breathed. Tears filled Arman's eyes despite his attempt to stay strong. He had never expected to care for her this deeply. But in those 7 days, she had become more than a responsibility. She had become a part of his life, a part he didn't want to lose. She motioned weakly for him to lean closer. He lowered his head until her whisper brushed his ear. "Thank you, for giving my last days meaning." The words pierced him like a blade wrapped in tenderness. He felt a pain deeper than anything he had known, a mixture of helplessness and love he never expected. "Don't say that," he whispered, voice trembling. "You're going to get better. I'll take care of you." Her eyes softened with a gentle sadness, as if she already knew the truth. The doctor stepped closer. "She needs rest," he said quietly. "Please let her sleep." Arman stayed by her side long after the doctor and staff left, watching her fragile breaths rise and fall. In that moment, fear settled into his heart, fear of losing someone who had unexpectedly filled the emptiness in his own. And deep down, he realized something. This week, this connection, had changed him forever. The night after Elena collapsed was the longest of Arman's life. He sat beside her bed, refusing to sleep, afraid that if he closed his eyes for even a moment, she might slip away forever. The dim lamp cast soft shadows across the room, and the ticking clock seemed louder than usual, marking each second with cruel indifference. Elena woke briefly several times during the night, each time giving him the same soft, apologetic smile, as if she felt guilty for worrying him. And each time, Arman whispered, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Dawn finally broke, bringing pale light through the curtains. But instead of comfort, morning delivered heartbreak. When the nurse checked her pulse, her expression shifted, first confusion, then sorrow. She gently touched Arman's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, she's gone." The world around him blurred. Her words echoed endlessly, like a bell tolling in an empty church. "Gone," he repeated in disbelief. Elena lay peacefully, her face relaxed, the faintest smile still on her lips. She looked as though she had simply drifted into a deep sleep. Arman knelt beside her, tears finally escaping, falling onto the back of her cold hand. For the first time since his childhood, he cried openly, without restraint, without shame. This wasn't just grief, it was the pain of realizing how someone could enter your life quietly, and leave such a deep mark when they were gone. The mansion filled with whispers, footsteps, hurried calls. Servants who had worked with Elena for decades wept in corners. The doctor bowed his head respectfully. But Arman stayed motionless, holding her hand, lost in memories far too big for the short 7 days they had shared. Later that afternoon, a lawyer arrived, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a briefcase heavy with documents. He asked to speak with Arman privately in Elena's study. Arman followed him, feeling numb. The study smelled faintly of old books and lavender, the scent Elena loved. The lawyer sat down, opened a folder, and cleared his throat with formal seriousness. "Arman," he began, "Mrs. Elena Ivanovna prepared her will last month. She made significant changes, all of it concerns you." Arman frowned, confused. "Me? But I only knew her for a week." The lawyer pushed the papers forward. "She left you her mansion, her businesses, her savings, her investments, everything." Arman's breath caught. This must be a mistake. She had no reason to. The lawyer raised a hand gently. "She did. She trusted you. She believed in your character. She said you were the first person in years who treated her as a human being, not as a millionaire." He handed Arman a sealed envelope. "She also wrote you a letter." Arman opened it with trembling fingers. Elena's handwriting, elegant but shaky, filled the page. "My dear Arman, you came into my life when I needed kindness most. You cared for me without expecting anything. You gave me companionship, dignity, and warmth. I cannot repay such a gift, but I can try. Use this fortune not to enrich yourself, but to enrich the world. Live well, live honestly, live kindly. That is all I want." A single tear fell onto the paper. In that moment, Arman understood. Elena's final gift wasn't wealth. It was trust, love, and a mission bigger than himself. For days after Elena's funeral, the mansion felt unbearably quiet. Her absence lingered in every corner. The empty chair by the window where she drank tea, the half-finished knitting on her bedside table, the soft slippers that would never be worn again. Arman moved through the house like a shadow, carrying the weight of her final letter in his pocket. He read it every morning and every night, tracing her shaky handwriting with his fingertips, hearing her voice in every line. She had trusted him, someone the world saw as insignificant, with everything she had built over a lifetime. That responsibility felt heavier than gold. In the following weeks, Arman met with the lawyer, the managers, and the business staff. Everyone expected him to change, perhaps to embrace luxury, to live like a millionaire, to spend freely. But Arman remained the same young man who used to share half his lunch with a stranger. He still rode the bus, still wore his old coat, still greeted everyone with quiet respect. People began to whisper, "He's different. He isn't after the money." Elena saw something in him. But Arman wasn't concerned with whispers. He was focused on one question. How could he honor the woman who had given him everything? One evening, he wandered into Elena's study and noticed a photograph he hadn't seen before. a picture of Elena standing in front of a school in her youth, surrounded by smiling children. On the back, written in her elegant handwriting, were the words, "Education saved my life." Something clicked in Arman's heart. The next morning, he called a meeting with the entire household staff, the business directors, and the lawyer. They gathered in the grand hall, curious and tense. Arman stood at the front, holding Elena's photograph in his hand. "This estate, these businesses, this wealth," he began slowly, "they were entrusted to me not to make my life easier, but to continue her legacy." He paused, breathing deeply. "I'm creating a scholarship fund, the Elena Ivanovna Foundation. It will support poor students, orphans, and young people who dream of learning but have no means. No one will be turned away for lack of money." The room fell silent. Some of the staff wiped tears from their eyes. Even the lawyer, a man who prided himself on his composure, blinked rapidly. Arman continued, voice steadier now. "I grew up with nothing. I know what it feels like to fight every day just to survive. Elena showed me that kindness can change a life. Now I want to pass that kindness forward." Within months, the foundation launched. Hundreds of students applied, some from villages with dirt roads, some from broken homes, some who had never owned a new book in their lives. Arman read every letter personally. Each acceptance felt like another seed planted in the world Elena loved but had grown distant from. On the anniversary of her death, Arman stood before the first group of scholarship recipients. Their eyes glowed with hope, with possibility, with gratitude. He spoke softly but firmly. "Your dreams matter, and you are not alone. Someone believed in me when I had nothing. And now, because of her, I believe in you." A warm breeze rustled the trees above him, and for a brief moment, Arman felt as though Elena herself was standing beside him, smiling, proud, at peace. Her legacy lived on, and through every life he helped, Arman understood the truth she had left behind. Kindness is the only treasure that grows the more you give it.